Hey, this is Bill Oberst Jr. from Criminal Minds, and you're listening to Then Is Now podcast.
Warning, warning!
Today's episode contains spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie or TV show that we are talking about, we highly recommend that you watch it first, then listen to this episode. Thank you.
Rise and shine, my sinners. When Father Evil starts his day, he gets a little deadly. Deadly Grounds coffee has the richest, smoothest flavor you'll find anywhere. It's sinfully delicious. Once you go deadly, you never go back. Order yours at getdeadly.com. Coffee's so good, it's scary.
Welcome to 13 Days of Hallowtober.
Hello and welcome to the special episode of Then Is Now podcast. I am your host, Rigor. Today, I am joined by the masterminds behind Pennsylvania's Drive-In Super Monster-Rama and the April Ghouls Drive-In Monster-Rama, both held annually at the Riverside Drive-In in Vandergrift, Pennsylvania. George and Gene, welcome back, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, we recently did a wrap-up show on September's Super Drive-In Monster-Rama, and now you guys are hard at work planning next April's event, right?
Yeah, I mean, the discussions have been already started, and it's still way off before we could do any actual booking of movies, but we're looking into things and talking about different ideas, and it'll come sooner than it'll catch up to us, by before you know it'll be the holidays, the year will be over, then January, and then we're like fast approaching it. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we are continuing our yearly event called the 13 Days of Hallowtober. Our theme this year is quote-unquote modern zombie films, and what that means is that we're not going to cover zombie films from before 1968, like White Zombie or I Walked with a Zombie, Teenage Zombies, and dozens of others that are voodoo related. No, we are covering the ones that came after and were inspired by George Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 1968. Night of the Living Dead not only set up the rules for modern zombies, it had a lasting effect on horror filmmaking for over the last 50 years. Now, on today's show, we are breaking that mold with a film that came after Night of the Living Dead, but its roots are in the voodoo zombie legends. I'm talking about the Blaxploitation flick Sugar Hill from 1974. Class is in session.
Blood is red. Voodoo is blue. Sugar is sweet. Revenge is sweeter.
I'm passing sentence.
Meet Sugar Hill.
No, please.
Not a place, but a brand new face.
My friends call me Sugar.
The foxiest,
Looking for anything special?
sexiest, deadliest chick in town. The mob took Sugar's man away. And now she's gonna make them pay.
I want them dead.
With a voodoo priestess called Mama Maitresse.
I know what you can do. The power you possess.
How strong is your hate?
And Baron Samedi, too.
My particular special. A drink that I'm famous for. The zombie.
This is my domain, a kingdom of the dead.
And an army of undead behind her.
Each death has had something to do with voodoo ritual.
There's nothing that Sugar can't do.
Use it.
The mob has never seen anything like Sugar Hill and her zombie hitmen.
Well, one of George's favorite films, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, Sugar Hill is It was shot in 1973, released in '74, and this was an American International Pictures during the height of the Blaxploitation film. And there were a few Blaxploitation horror films at that time. Of course, Blackula and Scream, Blackula, Scream, and a few others. Abby, which came after Sugar Hill, actually.
Right.
And Alabama's Ghost. There's a handful of them. But this is one of AIP's Blaxploitation horror films, and it was produced by Sam Sherman was one of the producers. The surviving head of AIP after Jim Nicholson left, and he was by this time he was running the company by himself because Jim Nicholson had left and then passed away. So this film, yeah, like you said, it has its roots in voodoo. It's not a zombie picture where they're eating people. It's basically it harkens back to the old zombie films where the dead were brought back to life to work, and in this case to kill off somebody's enemies. And the head character is Sugar Hill, and she gets her boyfriend who runs a club based on Haiti theme is basically these mobsters want to take over his club, and he doesn't want to sell it, so they end up killing him. So she gets revenge on these mobsters by going to this voodoo priestess who's played by Zara Cully, who was better known as Mama Jefferson on the Jeffersons. And she's like, by this point, she's like 80 years old or so, and it's a wonderful little performance. And she brings this character, this Baron character, who's also the same character.
Baron Samedi. He's actually a pivotal figure in the black arts, the voodoo arts, and I think that the character is sort of based on around the same time they had done with the James Bond movie a similar theme.
Yeah, and, the Jeffrey Holder. Yep.
Right, exactly.
In Live and Let Die, it's basically the same character, but this is he's played by Don Pedro Coley, a great character actor.
He's very good.
Who's unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But he had done some films with Fred Williamson. He's in Beneath the Planet of the Apes as one of the mutants.
Yeah.
Great scene where him and where James Franciscus and Charlton Heston fight him in the cage, and but that's another story. But he's wonderful, over the top as this character. That Sugar Hill, this attractive woman played by Marki Bay, who's actually really good. I mean, she was a good actress. She did some dramatic roles.
Oh, she's awesome in this.
Yeah, she's great in this, but I've seen her in other dramatic roles.
From Philadelphia, actually, wasn't she?
I think so. She's
Philadelphia.
She's in a movie called The Landlord with Bo Bridges from a few years earlier, early 70s. I've seen her in some other things. She's a really good actress. I don't know what happened to her. I mean, she's still with us.
Very Pam Grier-esque.
Yeah, she's tall and she has great features, but she never became as successful as Pam Grier. So let
me give you the synopsis of the film here. The film centers around fashion photographer Deborah Sugar Hill, so-called because she looks as sweet as sugar tastes.
And according to the press, yes.
She's the business partner of Langston, who runs Club Haiti, where voodoo ceremonies are part of the stage show and is located in an unnamed city that's implied to be New Orleans. The place is swinging with the reenactment of a voodoo ritual, complete with some fevered dancing that entices the crowd. But when it's done, Langston is confronted by a group of mobsters who wish to purchase the club on behalf of their boss, Morgan. Morgan wants more than a piece of the action. He wants the whole club. When Langston rejects Morgan's offer to buy the club, Langston is beaten to death in the parking lot by his thugs. When Morgan attempts to bully Sugar into selling her Beau's nightclub, she refuses. Her resistance is met with increased violence and threats. Sugar does what any reasonable woman in her situation would do. She goes to the voodoo priestess, who lives on a seemingly abandoned family plantation, Mama Maitresse.
Go ahead.
Sugar pleads with Mama to help her with retribution, and Mama calls forth Baron Samedi, a very animated spirit resplendent in top hat and tails, who grants Sugar her wish. Baron Samedi controls a legion of zombies, and after a deal is made, he turns control of the undead army over to Sugar, which she uses to exact revenge on the gangsters. Meanwhile, local cop Lieutenant Valentine, a former boyfriend of Sugar, is assigned to the case. He is something of a skeptic about the supernatural occurrences in the film.
Right.
From there, the film basically goes into a series of vignettes where, one by one, Langston's murderers are fed swift and gruesome justice by Sugar, the Baron, and his army of cobwebbed undead slaves, saving the best for last. So, first off, when did you guys first see this movie, and what was your first impression?
I saw it on. I don't remember this playing at all on Saturday afternoon TV here or anywhere actually. I went through a film renaissance in the early 2000s with this just digestive crazy. I had to see everything, and when I got to Blaxploitation, you know, I went the full gambit and did the Blackula films and found copies of Blackenstein and the other movies, and came across this film, and I think I bought the DVD when it came out, or I rented it from a local video place. That's how I first saw the film. Actually, I think I may have had it on VHS. So my experience with this film and with Marki and stuff wasn't until the 2000s. That was my first interest in it, and it was chiefly because of Blaxploitation. Like, the internet was young and trying to figure out how many films. I was already aware of the Pam Grier films, but I wanted to sort of breach or connect it to the horror, fandom, and went through a whole Blaxploitation horror thing, and that was one of the reasons why I found the movie. So I was aware of it, but never really saw it. You always saw the picture. I think you always saw the picture of the zombies with the silver legs, plastic egg cases. That's what they look like.
Right.
Yeah, we'll talk more. We're going to cover that. Yeah, but actually, my first experience with it was, like Gene was saying, this is a film that eluded us, because a lot of the AIP drive-in horror films from the 70s showed up on the CBS late movie. This wasn't one of them, and it didn't show like on my.
I don't remember seeing it as a kid at all.
Yeah, well, in New York on Channel 5 used to show it late at night under the title "Zombies of Sugar Hill," and it was cut to ribbons. I remember taping it on VHS, staying up late and like cutting out the commercial and everything, and it was almost incoherent. It was cut to now mind you, this is a PG movie, but it was still enough in there. Right. It was still like a lot of racy dialogue and enough violence where they still had to pretty much butcher it on TV. So that was my first experience, and it took a while for an uncut copy to surface until, like, I think Orion, because they had the AIP catalog, released it themselves on VHS, and then, like Gene said, MGM released the DVD, and now a Blu-ray came out a few years ago, and I highly recommend that, because not only is it a great transfer, but there's great extras. There's interviews with two of the actors who like say they're no longer with us, Don Pedro Coley and Charles Robinson, who's best known as one of the cast members of the sitcom Night Court from the 80s and 90s. He just recently passed away, actually, but there's a great interview with those two actors, as well as Richard Lawson, who had also done Scream Bakula Scream. He is still very much with us, and he plays the good guy in the movie.
Yeah.
So he does a great interview. And Paul Maslansky, who is the director, not only does a video interview, but he does a commentary. Now, Paul Maslansky was a producer of horror films going back to the 60s, and he had an association with AIP because he produced a time-made film called Castle of the Living Dead, which AIP brought right to television. Then he did The She-Beast, or a.k.a. Revenge of the Blood Beast, with which was Michael Reeves' first feature. He produced that, and then he produced the
Raw Meat.
Deathline Raw Meat, which was released by AIP over here. So he had an association with AIP. Sugar Hill was the only movie he actually directed, and he does a great job. I mean, it's a fast moving, it's a fun driving movie. It's got all the meat and potatoes in there. And like you said, for a PG movie, it's pretty violent, and it's got a lot of saucy dialogue. It's very, it's not politically correct at all because, well, first of all, Robert Quarry is Morgan, the head gangster character. Now, according to Robert Quarry, he played Count Yorga, of course, and did the sequel, and he was under contract at AIP, and this would have been the last film under his contract after he did Dr. Fives Rises Again and Madhouse. So they didn't know what to do with him, and he says that this character was originally meant to be black, and so but they threw him in there. So and then of course he's even though he has black henchmen working for him, he's racist, and his white henchmen are racist, so they're always very derogatory. So it's but that's typical of these blaxploitation films. That was the era, that's the way they are. But just having him in there is a treat because Robert, if you're a fan of this stuff, you love Robert Quarry, and it's unusual casting, and he really gets into the role, and he's like suave, but he's a real prick at the same time, and he's doing like a southern accent because, like you said before, it's supposed to take place in New Orleans, but I believe it's actually shot entirely in Texas.
It was shot in Houston.
Yeah,
very sleazy in the movie, and the character that he plays, which is of course, like George was saying, socially inappropriate, but it's very, very much part of the whole blaxploitation rise up against the man struggle that was kind of going on. It was not quite like today's woke films that are extremely politically correct in any way that they can be in pointing out social discrepancies or inadequacies, but these films were geared towards that audience that was out to have a social statement made, but also enjoy the fun time that they were having. So poking fun of, the character is almost a caricature of a white racist, and that's
absolutely
what was very prevalent in those movies. We didn't take them, we didn't live it as bad as the civil rights movement was. I'm saying as bad things happened during the civil rights movement. It was a different world than it is today, and they were proving that social inadequacy was very prevalent. In fact, that was the main theme of Night of the Living Dead, we found out all those years later. But, it started to poke fun at these characters, and they were like boss hogs, this white guy that thinks shit doesn't stink, and he's, they're saying that it was inappropriate, but they're laughing about it at the same time. And you don't see that in today's films. You don't see that type of entertainment factor. So Robert Quarry played the character with a lot of tongue-in-cheek, sort of over-the-top humor, and that worked for the movie, and that worked well with Marki. With the dynamic between the two of them and the exchanges back and forth. And now George picked. This was one of the 4 films that George chose for the first April Ghouls. It was the Saturday night, and to this day, we are still getting people that are saying on the page, my favorite night of all April Ghouls was that Saturday night. And
it was definitely mine. Wow. Yeah, it was definitely mine.
Absolutely.
And it worked. It's a film that just works so well on a driving screen. That one I remember being just mesmerized by how entertaining it was from beginning to end.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a film that was they were just obviously AIP, Blaxploitation, Voodoo, Zombie. I mean, it was just catered for the drive.
Right.
Everything, all the elements.
Right. But this movie, it doesn't matter. It was terrifying. It's one of these films that's it's an exploitation film without the exploitation. There's really no nudity.
No.
There's no, the violence that happens. You don't really see it.
Right.
But it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Nonetheless. And I think that works. That makes it great.
She also made a deal with him at the end because in all, this is through, my familiarity with witchcraft and the arts. You must give up things to get what you want. So the bargain that she had with Baron Samedi was to give herself, in order to get the revenge, and he took the white trash girlfriend for in the end of the movie. So it was she's just running her mouth.
She's played by Betty Ann Reese, who was also in Robert Quarry in The Death Master. And she was also in Unholy Rollers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A very uncelebrated actress, and she gives her up in the end of the movie, and social justice prevails.
And there is a cat fight between her and Sugar.
Cat fight. Yeah, absolutely.
Because that was another. That was another element. And those zombies, they were. They the makeup on them is really it's theatrical, but it's really creepy. And then the eyes are. I always said they look like ping pong eyes. That they were made out of ping pong balls, painted silver. And sure enough, like Paul Maslansky, I think in the commentary, he reveals that that's exactly what it was. Just a unique idea, Yeah. But I mean, it's just makes it unique. It's like really odd to look at. It's just
I remember the scene that sticks out for me is when the guy thinks and he's into it. It's like a pseudo-sexual sort of thing, and it turns out they're clawing him to death.
Yeah, that's Charles Robinson. Yep, and it's just a great thing because he's
that's fabulous, right?
He's going for his massage.
It's amazing,
and he's not looking. He's got his eyes closed, and he's on his stomach, and they're working on his back, and then sure enough, it's an undead that's getting more nails into him.
And Marki Bay, who played Sugar Hill, she was Diana Sugar Hill. She was awesome. She was so cute. She could have been the next Pam Grier.
Yeah, I was always...
But she wasn't. She was in this, and that was pretty much it.
I was always asking a number of the celebrity reps that I work with, why do we not have Marki? Why doesn't somebody have her as a client and have her at conventions? Because in particular, when they went and sourced all the character actors for... and they even got what's his name from Planet of the Apes. What was that actor's name? The black guy,
Don Pedro Colley.
What was his name?
Don Pedro Colley.
No, I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, he was Baron Samedi. He was
the guy
beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Almost in our cast reunion for Abby to appear at this convention.
Oh yes, Austin Stoker.
Right.
Austin Stoker.
Oh, Austin Stoker. Okay, yeah.
Right, it's like I always wanted to meet that woman because I thought, with the rarity that we have now in the convention circuit, would be fantastic. But I guess people had reached out to her. Like I have some sort of memory here saying that she had been reached out to and she was not interested in pursuing that, like pursuing the whole fan thing now. There's a lot of actors that just they're done with stuff. Who's good at that kind of stuff is Bill from Groovy Doom. He's always getting these unusual character actors to appear on his show or in print, and he's always telling me, I had to talk to them, and they don't do productions any longer, any type of like podcasts or anything, and they don't want to be remembered. One woman that he's interested in she was an actress from Horror High. She's apparently like a conservative governor's wife or something, and she doesn't associate anymore with the horror stuff. She is not part of that culture. So
yeah, he's talking about Rosie from Don't Look in the Basement. That's who he's talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's who she is. Right. Yeah. Actually, Pat Carty is coming up this weekend. Believe it or not, he found Pat and talked to Pat. He has Pat on the show this weekend. But yeah, there is some actors. They don't want to associate with the fan thing. I think that they think it's too exploitive for them, and they just want to be remembered for who they were, and that's it. So I think Marki Marki has had a successful run. I forget what I read. She's involved in something, and she seems to be well-rounded and had a very good run, and she's not interested in coming back to that, which really sucks for fans because there's a million questions. I know you would like to get a photo with her. I certainly would.
Oh,
but
yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. That's too bad. Because Marki Bay was so good. Robert Quarry was freaking awesome in this movie.
Well, George knew Robert.
He was so
George
evil.
Actually knew him.
George, you knew Robert Quarry?
Well, I mean, I met him a bunch of times. I wouldn't say I knew him, but I did,
Yeah.
Well, you met him numerous times. I certainly did.
Tell us, dude.
What's that?
Tell us about it.
He was a character. He definitely had a great sense of humor. He was great with the fans. And I just met him at a couple, like probably the early Chiller cons and stuff. when it was like just
okay,
when it was really just not so much like this big expo. It was more like a personal convention where they had a handful of old timer guests and no, he was great. I have his autograph on a bunch of things. And
now he had a car accident, right? And it almost put the kibosh on his career. But then he made a comeback in the '80s.
Yeah, he
right?
did. He was in well, more or less, he was in like a lot of B movies for like Fredo and Ray. But still, he was working again.
Oh yeah.
But he had some downfalls in his life, and definitely won't be forgotten. Definitely one of my favorite actors in these kind of movies for sure.
Yeah, George just kind of pulled that out of nowhere during conversation one time. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I met Robert Quarry like dozens of times." And I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Like, I didn't even know he was at conventions. But George was in the New York area, so he had access to a lot.
Well, still it was, and there was a Fanex show back in the '90s where he was there, and William Marshall was there, Blackula.
Oh wow!
So that was like, to me that was like, the second coming.
Yeah,
that was like unbelievable.
That's amazing. That's and when you look back at that, when I graduated college in the '90s and went right into the music industry, and I still have fond memories of walking into the venues that I worked at, and people hanging out backstage like Deborah Harry and stuff, and you're just like George. You look back at it now and you go, "Wow, did I really do that? Did that really happen?" So George has this great history of having been in the New York area and meeting these people. Like to me, that's a dream to meet Robert Quarry and William Marshall because of these films. So George, you were in a really good place. It didn't maybe seem like it was all that big.
Well, I still had to travel to meet him, but that's beside the point.
Still, that's incredible.
What about Betty Ann Reese, who played Celeste? She was a Death Master, the Mod Squad, and the Hulk.
I have no idea what happened to her. Yeah, she did only a few movies and some TV, and then disappeared.
Yeah.
And very good looking actress too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
and
very
Richard
sexy.
Lawson.
Yeah, Richard.
He was the dude in Poltergeist.
Yeah, Richard Lawson. Richard Lawson did a lot. I mean, he did a lot. I think he was a regular on Cagney and Lacey.
Yep.
And did a lot of film and TV.
Streets of Fire.
He was married to Pam Grier, actually.
Really?
At one time.
I know that.
Yep.
Wow.
I don't think they're still married. I think he,
I still haven't met Pam. I missed her. I missed her by 15 minutes of the convention, and I'm haunted by that to this day. I've approached so many of the convention people that I know and have said, she can't cost that much. Just make an offer. Find out who's representing her and get her in. Especially Still CityCon here in Pittsburgh. I don't know the new owners of it, but the previous owner, I used to always tell his staff, they would say to me, "Well, who do you think would sell?" And I'm like, "Well, you make millions of dollars off of Anthony Daniels. Why don't you invite someone like Pam Grier? Because she has a history. Even if she costs a little more money, your A celebrities are paying for her to be there. So, and I never got to meet her yet. I'm really, one of these days, I hope before she passes, I get to meet her. So I missed her by 15 minutes. I was devastated. And you know whose fault it was? It was Norman Reedus' fault that I missed her, probably because I was talking. I had gout and I was high on pain meds and I was babbling senselessly to Norman, not even realizing who he was. And that poor guy, what patience he had to put up with me. And I looked at my watch or my phone and I said, "Oh my God, I got to go see Pam Grier." And I left she was in a private suite and I went down the hallway and she was gone. She flew back to Los Angeles early. It was on a Sunday. So by 3:00 she was already on her way out of the hotel. So I missed her.
Oh, that's too bad.
Not a good story. Yeah, one of these days. We'll see what happens. I met Debbie Hedren actually at that show as well, and she was a kook. So.
Well, this is one of those Blaxploitation films, though, that it was really big back in the 70s. You know, in the aftermath of the initial wave that we had of the civil rights movement, you had all these amazing films, the Black Experience.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And then the horror kind of turned its lens towards it. And they said, hey, we could make some cool movies, you know, with Blackula and Scream, Blackula, Scream. Then we had Sugar Hill, you know. It was amazing.
I think the original Blackula is probably the best of all of them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He does a great job in that film. William Marshall he's very complacent in playing any character that he's given to play, and he is so good in that role. It may seem to people that he's over the top, and there's always jokes about the 80s generation and Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse and Cartoon King, and he was so well known for that character. But William Marshall, he made his rounds on TV and in films, and he was. I remember hearing a documentary, or I think it was that Blaxploitation documentary that came out a few years ago, and they were talking about how difficult it was for that film to be shot. That there was actually prejudice on the set. That some of the AIP associates were interested in the money that was going to be generated by the project, but not interested in the project or the actors. And he came in and did everything as he should, and just with all what I'm trying to say is with all the obstacles that was in his path, William Marshall played the character very top notch. He was committed to it.
Yeah,
he was very committed to the role. He
was the one that he added the cultural background of the character too.
Right.
That was his idea because they didn't have that originally, and he said this. He's got to have some kind of cultural background, and he added that to the character.
And the thing about this movie is like when I was watching it earlier. I mean, I had seen this about 3 years ago, and it's one of those movies like Ms. 45 that's been on my radar for years, for decades, and I just never got a chance to see it. I finally got a chance to watch it, and I mean, I loved it. The atmosphere, like when Sugar goes to Mama's house, it's this old. There's this whole sequence where it's soft focus, 70s kind of looking.
Lens.
I just love that.
Yeah, definitely.
The Vaseline lens, and I think they shot. Some of the shots were also done with like a fisheye lens camera.
Yep.
So it was very surreal and dreamlike, the whole experience of her. It wasn't just the experience of her going there. As a viewer, you were brought into like sort of an aesthetic of what it felt like to be her at the location, and it works on that level. It's a beautiful film.
That was all shot on location. There was no studio involved. Right. That was all on location.
Well, it was shot in Houston, though. That's the thing. It was supposed to be what? New Orleans?
New Orleans, yeah.
But it was shot in Houston, and if you watch it, in the very end of the credits, it says, thanks to the people of Texas and Houston.
Right.
Right. But there's a great line where she goes, as strong as my love is, my hate is stronger. And I think that
I remember that.
is really what sort of carries the film,
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good movie. It's definitely a film, like George was saying, that you look back at it, and it's staple for the time. It's a slice of what life was like in the 1970s for with all the racial tension that was in the country, and combined with horror. So it was the kind of movie that they could I think a lot of white audiences. The other thing with Blaxploitation was it was more accepted maybe because white audiences were watching horror films, and again, the message is there, but it's delivered in such a manner that, you can sort of make fun of it and not feel bad about making fun of it. You know what I mean? About Ralph Quarry's character and stuff. So it's a thumbs up. It's every February I do Blaxploitation at my house, and that's one of the films that everybody likes. I had parties for years, and I always watched it. I always made them sit through that. And then one year I showed Ganja and Hess, And
nice.
If you've never seen that, that's a whole nother story that we should talk about someday.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because Kyra Schoen was here at the house, and she had never seen Ganja and Hess, and of course it stars, what's his name from Night of the Living Dead,
Dwayne Jones,
and right, and she was just I was like, you need to see this movie. It's an amazing film, and it's I think we might have watched the movie we're talking about that night as well. I don't know. I think we might have watched Sugar Hill that night, and she liked it too. But we were talking about her experiences with Dwayne and stuff, and that's an amazing movie. That's even beyond art house quality. It's if he has to be known for something else in the horror realm, Ganja and Hess is decades beyond its time. It's a great film.
Yeah.
You have to see it if you haven't seen it. It's good stuff. But
hi, this is Rigor, host of Then Is Now podcast and The East Meets the West. I just wanted to say thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers. We appreciate your support as we grow the audience for our shows. You could find our links to our Patreon page as well as our TeePublic page at havenpodcasts.com. With Patreon, you'll get a lot of exclusive stuff, including our monthly pop culture newsletter, cool gifts, discounts for TeePublic, and our special exclusive show, Then Is Now Filmmakers series, in which we interview directors, producers, writers, composers, special effects guys, basically anybody who works behind the scenes in film and television, and get their insights into the process of creating films and TV shows. Also at our TeePublic page, you'll find cool merch that you can get or even give to others as gifts. You can find those links at our website, or you can go directly to teepublic.com/stores/havenpodcasts and patreon.com/thenisnowpodcast. Enjoy!
Are you a lifelong fan of General Hospital?
Are you a new fan who wants to know more about the history of the show?
Do you enjoy talking about the show with others?
Do you find yourself yelling at the TV?
Is your self-care an hour a day in Port Charles?
If so, we invite you to join hosts
Amanda Kimmel
and Shannon Coach at the place where all the hidden conversations take place and secrets are revealed.
Meet us at Pier 54,
a General Hospital fan podcast.
Hello, this is Rod Barnett. I'm the host of The Bloody Pit, the podcast that examines films from across the decades. On The Bloody Pit, we have several ongoing series of shows within the show focused on specific things in genre cinema that I and my co-hosts find fascinating. There's a long-running series focused on Italian maestro Antonio Margheriti's films from the 1960s all the way up through 1990. There's an on-again, off-again series focused on 1970s science fiction films. There's an in-depth look at the Western movies that William Castle made before he struck out on his own and became the horror auteur that we know and love. A look at the classic Coffin Joe films from Brazil. And our long-term project to look at every Universal horror film made in the 1940s. That's a long project, people. It's going to take us a long time. Sprinkled in amongst those are various other episodes focused on other stranger areas of cinema, like Lucio Fulci, Dario Argento, and even some obscure British crime films from time to time. So join me and my rotating crew of co-hosts as we examine the stranger side of cinema through an exploitation lens. Except when we don't? Yeah, you never really know exactly what to expect on The Bloody Pit. So join me for The Bloody Pit.
Shark Bite Podcast. It's the greatest show in history. From the Dorkening Network, hosted by a nerd who's named Patsy. From movie reviews to tips on surviving the coronavirus, Shark Bites has it all. Follow us on Facebook and suggest topics at sharkbitespod@gmail.com. Available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
And the thing about Dwayne Jones is, we've been trying to, with this series that you guys are in right now, we've been trying to talk about movies that are post-Romero, meaning post-1968 Night of the Living Dead, with the rules that he set up. But this movie's not one of those movies. It's a voodoo movie, which, like I said at the beginning, we're not covering those films. However, this film does that, but unlike the Romero zombies, the legions here from Baron Samedi are of the Haitian variety. So they keep, within the voodoo themes.
More traditional.
Yeah, the design is amazing. They're covered in cobwebs. They have these bulbous eyes. It's crazy. You could still do this in a post-Romero world and still have an amazing film, right?
Yeah. Again, I think some of it has to do with there was a coming of age. I'm 55. I don't know how old you are. George is
I'm 51.
A little bit younger than me, but around that time. That actor and actors like that actor, when you're talking about the Baron Samedi character, we're talking about, it was the voodoo thing was prevalent theme in the James Bond movie Live and Let Die at the time. And they were also doing 7-Up commercials. Do you remember the 7-Up commercial?
The coconut. Yeah.
Right, and it's just that Haitian culture, that connection with, not all black folk are from Africa. They're from Haiti and stuff. And there was sort of a surge in American culture at the time that was making people very aware of these things that existed. The voodoo was real. The tourism was certainly still happening down in. People go down there all the time to New Orleans, and the whole voodoo history thing, the whole culture, because of, all about the voodoo, right? About the actual religion. It's a combination of island religion and Catholicism, oddly enough, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And that whole thing, it's horror in itself. So, there was always this sort of it goes back to the Hammer films, actually. It was used in Plague of the Zombies. It was the same exact thing where they were taking over people's minds. Zombies are not just the living dead that eats people. Zombies, in terms of the islands, were people that were supposedly, appeared dead and were resurrected, like Serpent and the Rainbow many years later, which was a documentation about it. And who else did it in Search of, I think? With Leonard Nimoy did several episodes that were based on
the
whole voodoo ritual and zombies and stuff. So it was a legitimate horror thing at the time in the 1970s. I remember it being everywhere. It was done on Scooby-Doo, as a matter of fact. I can remember plots on Scooby-Doo and also on Josie and the Pussycat. Right. That had to deal with zombies.
And Kolchak the Night Stalker.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There you go. Coming out on Blu-ray in a week. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing about Sugar Hill. It was made for a PG audience, but, there wasn't a lot of blood, even though there was a ton of amazing killings.
Sure.
But we didn't see it. But, this movie they kind of went for the kiddie matinee, which I almost feel like it's too bad that they went for that audience, because you really could have had something here. You could have what's his name? The guy that played Baron Samedi. It could have been a whole series of movies like Blackula. They could have done several of these films with this guy.
Well, AIP was having problems with the because the sequels didn't make as much money as the originals, and as far as like the Blackula, Count Yorga, and Dr. Fives, the sequels were not making money, and that's why Coffee and Coffee with Pam Grier, the Foxy Brown, which was the follow-up, was supposed to be a sequel to Coffee, and basically it is, except she doesn't have the same name.
Right.
Foxy Brown, but it was supposed to be like called. It was going to be called like something like Burn Coffee Burn, and because the sequels weren't making as much money as the original, they decided to really like cut off doing sequels at the time.
Oh, okay.
So that could be why they'd want to do one-offs more. at that time.
Interesting. Like the scene where the zombies come out of the ground, which is a great scene in the movie. That's done in broad daylight. You know, you didn't see that before.
Yes, you're right. Well, it's broad daylight, but it's also it's also very ethereal and very dreamlike, because that's the same type. Wasn't that the same type of lens and like fog and stuff and whatever? So it's like sort of like, you know, the whole Tales of the Dark Side concept, that horror exists in broad daylight. You know, in the shadows, it's always there. And that was always a prevalent thing with, I remember one of my college professors used to say, evil is always found in, like, she always would quote the Sherlock Holmes films when she would say, evil is never in the city, evil is always in the country, and broad daylight out in the open is where, you know, Sherlock Holmes would find evil or whatever. And that's so true. And it's so true with that movie, because it just shows you that once she committed to the Voodoo and the Baron Samedi, there was this whole counterculture and other life that existed parallel with ours, and you're witnessing that happening. That's how the zombies were coming out of the ground and stuff, was that with a simple magical command, there they were, you know, and it could happen to anybody. And it's just, the film, it works on every level. It's just, you know what, and it's a pleasant surprise. When you talk about Blaxploitation and you talk about horror, it's really a pleasant surprise movie, because it has all the elements of both rolled into one. And again, like I said before, it presents it in such a manner that it's tongue-in-cheek, so that there isn't as much offensiveness. The message is not that offensive to some people that would have issues with it. You know, it reaches people, and, you know, it's prevalent, and you get it, and it's a great film. So it's a thumbs up.
Oh, I agree. You know, the zombies in this film, they're not eating the victims to death. They
just kill them.
Like all kinds of inventive deaths. They're throwing guys into a pen of hungry pigs or a pen of snakes or whatever. And it's like, but it's still scary. That's the thing. Like when you watch a horror movie, whether it's Blaxploitation or not, you want to be terrified. You want to be scared. And I watched this movie, and well, you know, and I get scared easily. I got to tell you guys now. I get scared really easily.
The thing that makes horror really...
I was terrified.
The thing that makes horror really good is when horror films present themselves in a manner that something seems to be more commonplace every day and becomes and the terrifying aspects of it. And that's kind of what you're tapping into, because it's the loss of your personal control, or the character's personal control in the world around them. It's seemingly normal world, and a lot of modern horror has really played on this. When you look at the Final Destination movies, which I can't stand, I loathe them. They're always the same thing where you're taking, and this happens with all horror films now, it's really more prevalent now than it ever was before, is you find yourself in that position and how quickly your life changes, the character's life changes. And exactly what the horror is that you are experiencing from this film is the lack of self-control that these characters have in the different scenarios that they're being murdered and stuff, you know, and that's what people relate to. People relate to that fear of lack of self-control. It's not even the pigs eating the people. I think that psychologically affects people. It's the fear of lack of self-control. You know, it's always in these films, if you're pulled out of reality and put into a world that you have no understanding or control. And that's prevalent with, I just saw Malignant, and it was ridiculous. It was like 2 hours.
Oh, it was awesome.
2 hours of living. It was a video game for 2 hours is what it was. And again,
the first 2/3 was a slow burn, but the last third was like batshit crazy. You know,
it was batshit crazy, and I sat here laughing at the screen.
I
can't say I disliked the film, but what I would say to you is that it was so out of control that it was a sensory overload. I just sat and laughed at it, and I thought, what the hell what is he going for here? Because it's like the Matrix all of a sudden, you know, and other movies that are similar, and you know, it was enjoyable. But again, it's that whole lack of self-control that in these films that draws people to the whole experience. they're sort of like bondage, aren't they? Where you get tied up and you don't know what's going to happen to you. It's that
Use
same
your safe
type
word.
of thrill. Right, it's the same type of thrill where you're surrendering control to horror or to somebody else or something, and that's very prevalent in Sugar Hill. It really is. It's very prevalent.
Well,
because
and that's the thing. That's what I was going to say. I feel like the weak link in this film was Richard Lawson's character, where he played Lieutenant Valentine, and he was the skeptic. But by the end of the film, he's kind of understanding. He's developed an understanding, I should say, as to the supernatural nature of what's going on. But he doesn't quite put two and two together. He doesn't realize that Sugar's the one connected to the killings. And that always kind of bothered me, that he should have figured it out. I felt, I don't know, personally, I just felt like I wish as a character that he had figured that out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you. I know what you're saying. George, do you have a take on that?
I really never thought about it, but I guess you're right. I love how she, let's say harmlessly, like he's coming on. He's coming on. He's getting the hint of what's going on. Or she's coming on, like he's knowing too much information. So I'm going to make him fall down a flight of stairs to break his leg and put him in the hospital. That's like her way of like, it's basically like, oh, geez, she had his leg broken, so he'd be out of the way. So he'd be out of commission of his investigations.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amusing, I mean, it's done in a way where it's like, well, his leg is broken, he's in the hospital, but he's okay.
Right.
I have to say too, the Baron Zombie character. I mean, how do you put this in? And you got to, and again, this goes back to decades when this was made. This is not politically correct, but there's an amusing factor to his character where he becomes like, what they used to call him Uncle Tom's, where he'd be doing like a derogatory African American black, person when he was doing when he was setting up the murders of the white henchmen, and he'd be dressing up as like a cab driver or a construction worker, and he'd be like, going, yo, no, yo, sir, yes, sir, yes, and basically, he's the way, he's got the upper hand. You know what? That's what I like about it. It's like, I want to see these guys killed because they're assholes. And it almost reminds me of like what Lionel Jefferson did in All in the Family to Archie Bunker when he would, when he'd be like, kind of patronizing Archie for his like ignorance of black people and black culture.
Again,
you know what I mean? And it's all in good fun. You got to take it for when it was made.
Right, exactly.
And you got to realize this guy has the upper hand. He's not the fool. He's the guy that's got the upper hand.
It was sensitive. It was sensitive area that was covered in such a manner that you didn't have. And I get kind of tired of the cancel culture thing, but it's a reality. It really exists. It does exist. And I'm a very PC person within reason, but I'm also not someone that forgets what life was like in the 1970s with the civil rights movement happening and stuff. I remember it very much. And again, this film deals with that aspect in such a manner that it makes it humorous. It makes it funny to watch. You could watch it as a black or white audience member and get the joke without being an outraged black person or white person and say, this is politically incorrect. Oh my God, I can't take 5 minutes of that. It was done in such a manner that they knew that they were addressing the race issues, but they made it entertaining and approachable to do so. It wasn't like, I just saw the new Candyman, and it's just, I watched it with a friend of mine and saw the original movie with me, and we were both sitting here, and I said, didn't the first movie make enough of a statement that I have to have these scenes of cops beating people to death? I mean, this is what reality is today. And the way that American audiences are approaching this whole issue today as compared to, like George is saying, the black actors playing, the stereotypical black characters in white culture and making fun of them and getting away with it. It's like, it's how blackface is offensive today. Like back then, you kind of got it. But if you did that today, you're done. You know, political careers end. Everything ends. You can't joke about that stuff anymore. And with the way the mentality is today, you can't joke about it, literally, you know, because it's a different world that we're living in. But back then, he could play these characters, and you got that. You got it. You instantly said to yourself, he's making fun of these characters. He has the upper hand. You know, Archie Bunker, for instance, as George said, Archie Bunker isn't the dumbass here. It's not Lionel Jefferson. And Lionel Jefferson's subservience to Archie and his replies and stuff are what we expect, so that we can laugh at Archie and say, he's not with it. He's out of it, you know? But it's a different world today. It's just not the same.
Well, that was the whole point. Archie Bunker was supposed to be how you're not supposed to behave, you know?
Exactly.
People took that to mean that's how we should behave, and that's incorrect.
It happened in Maude. It happened in Maude. It happened in everything that Norman Lear did at that time.
Right.
It is amazing. An actress that worked with Norman Lear that I know very well, she's a prevalent actress. Two of them, in fact. I'm not.
If you tell me Adrienne Barbeau, I'm going to jump out of the microphone right here.
Actually, Adrienne is one of these people. And the other actress, I don't want to mention her in the podcast, but I asked her about that. I said, how in the hell did you get away with all this racial stuff with Norman Lear back in the 70s? And she said he had such control of his art, his work, and respect from the networks that he could do that stuff, and people were lining up to be part of it, and it was just a different culture than it was. You know, and Adrienne, she was so lucky. The first time I met Adrienne, it's been 20-some years ago, and the first thing I asked her about, honest to God, was what was it like to work on the cast of Maude with Norman Lear? I wasn't concerned about the fog or any of this stuff, because my earliest experience with Adrienne was B. Arthur's daughter in that show. Yeah. And the stuff that was addressed on that, you know. And
the Swamp Thing.
She wouldn't have got well, you know, Adrienne has a lot of amazing stories. If anybody ever meets her at a convention, ask her about, you know, her involvement with John Carpenter and their time in Pittsburgh. And one story that she tells about how, and Tom Atkins tells the same story, and it makes my head spin every time, is that there was a dinner party here in Pittsburgh at George Romero's house with Stephen King and John Carpenter at the same table with Baron Samedi and her. I know exactly. It's like this really happened. And one time around the time of Creepshow, all these people were friends with one another, and that's how Tom got involved in The Fog, and Tom was involved in Creepshow and all this stuff. These people were all friends with one another, and it's crazy to think that actually is. And being a local here, it's amazing to me to think, oh my God, you're telling me that all these people that are like the icons of horror sat down in the city blocks away from where I live and had dinner. That's amazing to me. But then again, the cast of Night of the Living Dead always lived in my neighborhood too, so that's another thing. Yeah. You know, I knew where Carl Hardman lived, and from the Autopsy of the Dead video, because I could see when it's just so weird. And it's the truth. I knew the house was across the street from the window where they filmed the interviews for the documentary. I had driven past that house a dozen times. So one day when I was out with Kyra, she said, "You want to see where my dad lives?" And I said, "I know exactly where your dad used to live because I saw a documentary and I know where the house is." It was it wasn't like a fanboy moment, but it was like, I know it's this street and I know it's this town because I've driven past that house a dozen times, and I even stopped and looked at it, and it's the right house. And she said, yes, it is. And it was just amazing. It's a little, when you live local like that, the nuances are just crazy. You know, it's like, oh yeah. You know, like people see Tom Atkins at the local grocery store.
It's funny because that's the thing about this movie is it's sort of it's a mix of the Voodoo style, and then you got, a little bit of the Romero shambling zombies, the rotting zombies from his undead movies. And, you get a little bit of the Val Lewton bug-eyed zombies from I Walked with a Zombie. So there's a lot mixed in here. And the thing I was thinking when I was watching this, now I watched this like 3 times over the last couple of days just to make sure I had it all in. And I felt like that scene where the zombies are coming out of the ground, if they had the music from Lucio Fulci's movie Zombie, it would have been amazing. I mean, the scene was great as it was, but it would have been amazing. You know what I mean?
I do agree with you. I think you're right, and that's a whole other subject. And I think George can also respond to this. You know, with the Italian horror films, the thing that's fascinating about those movies, especially the Lucio Fulci films, all of the horror films in particular, is that you don't have the boundaries that you have with American productions, with Italian and with Spanish productions. They just sort of have this go for it attitude. Yeah. And crazy shit happens. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, their imitation of American art, horror, has been so interesting. Like, when they were done with zombies, they went to cannibalism. That was the next thing that they did. And you know, and cannibals are living zombies that are eating people. And it was like somebody in Italy said, you know what? Cannibals are scary. We're going to do a dozen cannibal films. And the films were instantly successful, but all that stemmed back to Dawn of the Dead. So when you're looking at these horror movies, like you're talking about with the voodoo and everything, and actually didn't one of the Fulci films take place in New Orleans or somewhere? Wasn't the house from The Beyond supposed to be New Orleans, George?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beyond,
sort of did that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That was shot in Louisiana, yeah.
Right, exactly. So there's sort of the connection there as well. But
yeah,
I get you 100%. I think that's another reason why Sugar Hill was way ahead of the ball game in terms of the other horror films at the time. Or, you know, it's unique for sure. It stands out. There was no voodoo horror taking place in the 1970s. I don't even think. What's the movie, George, where they're on the boat? Is it called Voodoo Priest? There's a Blaxploitation.
Oh yeah. That's actually a Spanish production. Black Voodoo Exorcist.
Exactly. Right.
At least that's the American title. Yeah.
Yeah.
With Alfred
Sum.
That's about 73.
Okay, around the same time.
Yeah.
And one of the films we just covered on this series, it was The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, and that's also 74, same year as this movie. It's very different. One of those ones that sort of, you know, it's between Night and Dawn of the Dead.
You know, well, that film is just something onto itself. It's just that film is a masterpiece, and we were able to show it and at Monster-Rama, and
nice.
Like I think it's been written up. I think Michael Weldon in the Psychotronic book first said it was like the best of the Night of the Living Dead ripoffs, and it still is. I mean, it's just.
Oh yeah.
I don't mean that it was. I mean, it was a ripoff in the sense that
when she comes across that guy, that is epic Night of the Living Dead cinematography, and there once a month, I swear to God, the UK horror fans go to that valley where she was assaulted by the corpse. And
the locations they visit those locations. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think a lot of the UK, from what I've seen, a lot of the UK horror fans. And I don't blame them. They kind of like want to claim that as like a UK horror film, even though it's really not. I mean, it was shot in England.
It's an Italian-Spanish film, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And even like the actors were all mostly, except for Edgar Kennedy, who was Irish American. But yeah, it was all Spanish and Italian actors.
Right.
Ray
Lovelock was half. So
it's a very endearing film. It's very similar to Night of the Living Dead in the sense that. Night of the Living Dead, we look at it as a horror film, and we look at it as a culturally significant film now, believe it or not, big time. But, it also sort of played into that whole Hammer Quatermass thing where weird science was causing things to happen, The ghouls that were coming back at Night of the Living Dead was radiation from outer space, possibly, that was causing it. So it was more of a sci-fi thing, and it's the same thing when you look at Manchester Morgue because of the whole radio signal that's causing them to come back to life. It's a very similar
the agricultural machine,
And to answer George's question there, Ray Lovelock, the main character in Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, he was a big star in Italy. He was half Italian and half British. Right. His father was British.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was, and then he kind of he had it down. He definitely had a more English look. And if you ever all the interviews I've seen with him later on, he always spoke in Italian.
Well, yeah.
But I mean, I assume that he knew English fluently, but he kind of
they dubbed him in that
language
movie.
in favor of tie-in.
Yeah.
Because he was in, like, he said he was in rock bands. And,
yeah.
You know, he was doing, like, Rolling Stones songs. So he's definitely got that English side to him. But
we did a show recently.
Yeah.
He was in Live Like a Cop, Die Like a Man. It was one of those Italian Poliziotteschi movies.
He's in quite a few
you
of
had
those,
these cops that were they were authorized to use deadly force, you know. It was a great subgenre of cop films in Italy.
But see, that film,
it's a whole other topic.
It's okay to claim it as a UK film, even though it wasn't it was shot on location there.
Right.
Because it fits into what George and I always call the Saturday afternoon British horror film, like Psychomania. And, you can sit here and name like 10 movies that had that. And same way with Raw Meat and stuff. There was always this sort of mod 70s hippie, horror thing going on. Like Scream and Scream Again was another example of it. Like The Sorcerers. I mean, these are the films that we watched as a kid, on Saturday afternoon. And
I'm still watching them.
Films.
I'm still watching them.
Me too. Me too. Exactly. Yeah.
Those are some of my favorite movies, actually.
And Dracula 72 AD.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Or 1908 AD 1972. Yeah.
Yeah. I never get that right.
1972.
Right. Sorry.
So let's wrap this up here, guys. Final thoughts on Sugar Hill, and would you recommend it? George, you go first.
I definitely would recommend this movie, even if you're not a fan of the Blaxploitation cycle, even if you're not too well informed about 70s horror films and 70s zombie films, because it's very entertaining. It works on every level, and I highly recommend the Blu-ray that's still in print that came out from Scorpio and Kino, not only for the great transfer, but the extras are fantastic on it. It's well worth owning. It's one of my favorites. In fact, I'm probably gonna pull it out again to watch for Halloween time.
Oh yeah, yeah, Gene.
Yeah, and two things here. One, I kind of want to apologize for being all over the place, but
no worries.
Part of the whole horror fan thing. Absolutely recommend this movie, and one of the reasons why I recommend it is because just the conversation we had tonight, where you can connect it to so many different things, and it's the same way that like people that were worried about the Jaleo weekend that came out and raved about it, experiment and go out and try new things. And if you're not familiar with Blaxploitation film, and it's the first Blaxploitation horror film you're ever going to see it instead of the Blackula films, because there is a little more going on here in this movie than there is with the Blackula films. And I think this movie takes itself a little more seriously, culturally wise and horror wise, than it's much more enriched than ripping off the whole Dracula legend and making it black. So I'd say, yeah, if I had to suggest one Blaxploitation horror film, it would absolutely be this movie over the other ones.
Oh yeah,
not Blackenstein.
No, it's a terrible movie. That's a terrible film. Or Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Black, or whatever its name was. That's awful. Oh my God, it's terrible.
I have to say, I haven't seen either of those movies. I'm dying to. I just can't seem to get my hands on them. But I totally agree. I feel like this movie's it's an exploitation film without the exploitation. There's not a lot of sex in it. There's no nudity. There's violence, but you don't see anything. And it's still scary. I'm telling you, I watched this like 2 or 3 times over the last couple of days, and I was terrified every time I watched it.
Well,
it's great.
It doesn't go too overboard, because this was still a time where, even though there were some quite a few R-rated films in the early 70s up to the mid 70s, they were still catering them to the kids, and they were for the most part rated PG.
Right.
Even stuff like Willard and Ben and all that, those are rated PG. The Hammer films that came out in the early 70s, which definitely, some of them had to be cut to get an R rating, but for the most part, they were brought over here and they were just cut to ribbons and to get a PG rating. I think all the early 70s films, except Twins of Evil and Vampire Circus, were like cut. I'm talking about the non-Warner Brothers productions.
Right.
But they were, like AIP picked up Sister Hyde and Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde and Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, and they cut them to get a PG because they were marketed to the kids. So
But this one works, even though it's not.
I think Toby Hooper said he was even trying to get a PG rating for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that film, that film's minimal as far as gore. I mean, there's nothing that graphic in that. There's nothing sexual in that. It's terrifying. It's brilliantly terrifying. But it's just a little.
It's all the atmosphere.
It definitely, it definitely deserves an R rating just for the shock value and just
material that's
exactly
R-rated about that movie.
And you bring up a great point because just like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this is one of those movies that when you walk away from it, you walk away thinking that you saw more than you actually did.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's a safe movie.
I think it's highly enjoyable. I don't think it matters that it's not that exploitive. I recommend this. I think people should check it out, see it. It's a Voodoo zombie movie. It's not a Romero zombie movie.
No, not at all.
It has elements of it, but I got to say...
It's based in black magic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And don't forget the theme song, Supernatural Voodoo Woman by Motown recording artist, The Originals, which was not a hit.
The Originals, yeah.
Yes.
Which I couldn't find that on Spotify. It's not on there.
Yeah, that just goes to show you it's probably pretty obscure, I never tried to seek it out, but it's a catchy tune. I like it.
We didn't see that movie until it's just not accessible like the other blaxploitation films. One thing I want to say real quick is when you look at it again versus Blackula and the other films, anything in my book that is more obscure is usually better. It's a hidden gem, and that's exactly why I suggest Sugar Hill is better than those other films, because it is exactly that. It's a hidden gem. It's something that is of decent quality that just isn't over advertised and talked about. So it's definitely the film to see.
Absolutely. I agree with you guys. Thanks for joining me today, George and Gene. Can you guys once again just tell us how to find your page on Facebook?
No.
Yeah, it's just put in Drive-In Super Monster-Rama, and you will see our community page, and that'll keep you informed about all the future events, which will be, the next one will be April Ghouls in 2022, and then followed by the September Drive-In Super Monster-Rama.
Twice a year, that's it. So there are no summer shows.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining me again today. It was a great episode.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yep, definitely. We'll see ya.
Okay, folks, thanks for joining us today for our special 2021 13 Days of Hallowtober series, where we focus on modern zombie films. You can send your feedback to thenisnow42@gmail.com. You can also join in the conversation at our Facebook Then Is Now podcast group. Then Is Now podcast is a proud member of the Dorkening Podcast Network, so please be sure to check out the other great shows there at thedorkening.com. You can also visit our website at havenpodcasts.com, where you'll find our sister show, The East Meets the West, in which we discuss Shaw Brothers films and spaghetti western movies. And while you're there, please click on the Patreon and TeePublic links to get some exclusive stuff, especially a show that you cannot get anywhere else. And Then Is Now is on YouTube, so please visit youtube.com/user/UncleDeath1 to get the latest videos as well as other fun videos. Please subscribe to our YouTube page and also share the video versions of our podcast with your friends and get them to subscribe as well. Don't forget to go wherever you download your podcast from and leave us a great review so that more listeners can find us. You can find us on all the podcasting apps, especially the big three, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Class dismissed.
Then Is Now podcast is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. Sounds, music, and clips played during this podcast are the property of their copyright holders. All original content is copyright Jupiter Media.
For more shows like the one you just heard, check out the Dorkening Podcast Network at thedorkening.com.